Spontaneous generation goes all the way back to Greeks, probably before, and they believe that, until recently, they believe that organisms could spontaneously generate. You take some meat and just let it sit there, and lo and behold, we get maggots, we get flies, they spontaneously generate. Well, we've done research on that, and Pasteur and Redi and others, basically, they looked at this problem, or what they saw was a problem. And Pasteur is probably the most well-known for the research. And what he found basically eventually proved spontaneous generation cannot occur. And I'll show you briefly some of the experiments. And when I bring this out to evolutionists today, they say, well, that's true, it doesn't. But it did at least once way back in the past. How do you know that? Well, it had to, because here we are. And if we're here, then there must be spontaneous generation, because after all, evolution is true, and there must be spontaneous generation. Just goes way back. Must at least once have occurred. And the fact is, it didn't occur. And abiogenesis is the technical term for it. Abiogenesis is life from non-life. So you have non-life, you have some molecules which are not living, and we end up with generating somehow something so that they became living. But we know that biogenesis is now a law in biology. When I taught biology, I stressed this. Biogenesis says life only comes from life. It cannot come from non-life. And then, of course, when we cover evolution, then we contradict that part of the book, and we say, well, once it did. Only once, but today it doesn't do that. And I don't see the contradictions. Aristotle, he proposed this idea. Others did too, but probably Aristotle popularized it. And he called it abiogenesis, which means that this is where life does not come from life, but from non-life. And he said living things can arise from non-living things. And this idea was around for, well, 2,000 years. Some of the experiments they did, Francisco Redi did this experiment. And he said, okay, we have a jar. We put meat in there. The flies come in. They lay eggs on the meat. We have maggots. And people said, well, that means the flies have to come in. So life does not come from non-life. It comes from the flies. So that proves biogenesis. And so he said, okay, we'll put a cork on the bottle. We will not let any flies come in. Therefore, the meat will remain without any maggots. And they said, what? We got but. Something else. The spirit of life has to be able to come in. It can't because of this cork. So he says, okay, we'll put a piece of gauze on the bottle, and the spirit of light can get through. Oh, yeah, okay. And guess what happens? No maggots appear, but maggots appear on the gauze. And they said, well, the gauze must be able to stop the force of life. Well, what's this force of life? Well, this is what causes non-life to become life. And so they said, okay, we'll try again. And these are a bunch of experiments they did. They did lots of experiments. And again, if you prevent the flies from reaching the meat, you have no life. Okay? No maggots. And Pasteur is the most famous. And there's a well-known picture of him in his lab. French scientist. And his motivation was very clear. He said, a bit of science distances one from God, but much science nears one to him. The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator. So he acknowledged, well, he was a creationist. So why did he do these experiments? He was trying to prove creation. So one of the early scientists that were creationists. And this were some of the experiments he did, which are really very ingenious. So you're saying the gauze stops the force of life from coming in to the jar. What about if we have just a tube here? There's nothing stopping. It's a clear path. The force of life can come in here and can, after you boil it, of course, it can then cause life to appear in the beaker, or flask in this case. And they said, okay, so we did this. And if you break the stem, you had microbial growth in this case. If you didn't break the stem, no microbial growth. Because by this time they discovered bacteria, and they said, bacteria is the source of life. Bacteria are so simple, there's nothing inside of them. It looks just like a little blob of something. And therefore, obviously that's life because it moves around and causes infections and so on. So therefore that proves abiogenesis. And Pasteur says, oh boy, we're back to step one. Start all over. And then he did these experiments, and he proved that bacteria does not spontaneously appear anywhere. It has to come from other bacteria. Life comes from only life. And this, by the way, was important back then, because if bacteria can spontaneously generate itself, how do you prevent bacteria from infecting you? Can't do it. But if bacteria only comes from other bacteria, therefore, if we prevent bacteria from getting in your body, therefore, you cannot get an infection caused by bacteria. And so it was really an important question. It wasn't small. And he did indeed prove that indeed bacteria does not spontaneously generate. It can come in your body only from somebody else. So that really was important in science, because from that we have cleanliness, sterilization, etc. It said that in medicine, the two most important developments ever was discovery of bacteria and cleanliness, and the second thing was vaccines. Those two things have done more good in medicine than any other discovery. And so those were important. And to you, it's pretty obvious. I mean, I bet most of your houses are really clean, right? Before you eat, you wash your hands. If you're a nurse, doctor, you wash your hands. And I bet most of you have clean houses. Why? In the olden days, people did not have clean houses, because what's the point? I mean, why should I clean the floor? It just gets dirty again. So clean houses were not a concern in history, because there's no point. But you are very aware of that, and you may not even be aware of why you have a nice clean house, but that's why. And so after this work was done, then clean houses became a new thing, an important thing. Cleanliness became a new thing. In the olden days, people would rarely take a bath. Why? What's the point? I just get dirty again. In fact, many, I'm told when I go to museums, in the 1800s, 1850s, and before, many people took a bath once a year. That's all. There's no need to take a bath more often. Later on, when they became more concerned about this, they took a bath once a week. And I bet you know what day they took that bath. Anybody? Saturday, you got it. Yeah, once a week you took a bath. And I bet all of you, I hope all of you, most of you take a bath every day. How many take a bath every day? See, there we go. Why do you do that? You don't even know probably why you do that. You do that because of what Pasteur did. So it was not a minor thing. This was one of the most important things that creationists did to help our community. Most religions up to the 1850s supported this spontaneous generation idea. And this was a good example of where all too often, we've been talking about this much of today, all too often the churches go along with whatever science says is cool. Well, if scientists say this, it must be right. And that is tragic. We were just talking about Baylor University. And I guess most of the professors at Baylor are evolutionists. And I see that as a big problem. And I was at Baylor a few years ago, and I gave a lecture there. And I'm surprised to learn that most were evolutionists. Beautiful campus, by the way. I gave a lecture in the chapel, and nice people. But one of the lectures there was, did Adam really exist? And they were trying to show from that lecture that Adam really didn't exist. We evolved from apes, and evolving from apes, some of those became Adam, and God says, hey, I like this guy here. He's doing pretty good, so I'll destroy all the rest, and we'll encourage him to evolve, and that became Adam.